Hello and welcome to the lecture for week 3 of our class. So the work you did last week was really work that you did in preparation for writing a business plan. This week you'll work on the first segments of your business plan. So one segment we'll talk about in this lecture is the company description. That tells a reader what the name of your company is, what the basic premise of the business is, what your mission is, which is why you exist as a business, and then deal with some legal issues. The other section you'll work on is the industry analysis. So that's describing to the reader what's going on with your industry broadly, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and how do you expect to meet those. So along the way here, I'll mention a little bit about different books that I've read that I think are really beneficial. This one here is written in the UK. It's called Eating the Big Fish, and it's a challenge that it talks about a challenge that I faced as a business where I had a relatively small business compared to big competitors. Many of you will be in the same situation. You'll be running a startup, whether it's a brewery or distillery, and you'll of course be competing against much larger companies. And this book really gets at how to make that work. The key message that I got from the book that I applied in my business is don't try to keep up with the big guys. Don't try to market or advertise as much as they do. Don't try to repeat the same message that they're giving to their customers. You'll never win that fight. You'll always come up short. So the key is to find some issue that matters to your customers that the big guys aren't talking about. So it's not a matter of kind of shouting louder than the big guys, which means spending more money on advertising. It's about having a different message than the big guys that can cut through the clutter. So it's a really good book, an easy read. I really recommend it for any of you that are serious about starting your own business. So the company description section, when you write it, please understand that I know that a lot of you haven't decided on all of this yet. So you can do one of two things. You can either just kind of make a guess and go for it in that regard and then change it later if you want to. Or you can always use in brackets TBD for to be determined, and then know that when you do your final business plan, you have to insert what you're really going to call your business as an example in those sections. Go back and do that editing. So the company description section is going to include your company name, and we'll talk about each of these things in more detail. It'll include your legal status and ownership structure. It'll include your mission statement, a brief description of the products and services you intend to offer, and then what stage you're at currently in your development. So choosing a company name is kind of a tricky thing. There could be a lot of different names associated with your business. Of course, there could be the legal name of your business, how you're incorporated. You could have a DBA, which is doing business as, so a more common name for your business. Within that company name, you could have individual products with names, and then of course your website could be something different as well. So keep in mind that there could be a collection of different ways that your business is referred to. So some tips on coming up with a company name. One, it should be clear enough to communicate with customers what it is that you do. If you open a brewery and you call it Acme 1000, well, that doesn't tell anybody what it is that you do, that you make beer, as an example. So you want it to be clear enough that when people hear the name, they associate with what you do to avoid confusion. You want it to be pronounceable. Don't make a company business name that people can't speak clearly out loud and tell other people about. You want it to be broad enough that it gives you flexibility to adapt in the future. So you might not want to call your business the Thurston County Distillery. That might limit your ability to market products outside of Thurston County, as an example. So you want it to be broad enough that you can expand without having to change your name later. One, it's a good idea to do a check to make sure that the name you want to use is not already in use. You could do that by going to the Washington Secretary of State's website and doing a search for businesses there, and it'll tell you if somebody else has already registered a business name and the name you want to use. It was a distillery in downtown Olympia several years back called Whistling Pig Vodka. And they found out that after they had already made their signage and all their marketing literature and business cards and invested a lot of money in printing, that there was another business with that same name that issued a court order that they had to change their name. The problem with that is it diverts a lot of energy to something that's not really productive, having to change your name, and it's expensive. You have to throw away all that old stuff and start over again. So that's something you definitely want to avoid. So do the research. Does somebody else already use that name? And then there are some issues. So using your own name, the advantages of using your own name and the company name is it can instill trust in your customers. If you're willing to put your own name behind it, it can kind of give the feeling among customers that they're buying from an individual, not a corporation, that sort of thing. The downside to it is it's a little more difficult to sell your business down the road because, of course, the name goes with it. So the mission statement is something that it takes a lot of time for a business to come up with a good one. So what a mission statement is, as I say here, it's a clear, concise statement. So no more than a couple of sentences that sums up what your business is all about. It's why does your business exist? Okay, that's what it should convey to a reader. So it's important to come up with that, and that could take quite a bit of time to come up with the right couple of sentences about why your business should exist. So there's some help in the book that you can look at if you're interested. So it's a guideline stating what's important to your business, and it'll provide guide rails in the future about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, what's kind of outside the scope of your business and what is inside that scope. So here's an example. I worked for, helped a guy start a company in the US here making outdoor fitness equipment, and we crafted this 4-sentence mission statement about what we believe. And we felt strongly enough about that was running as a slideshow on the homepage of our website. So it was a way to convey to customers, this is what's important to us. If you feel the same way, then we're a good company for you to do business with. So that's kind of the intent of a mission statement. It conveys to your customers, this is what we're about, this is what's important to us, and it conveys to your employees, this is what we're about, this is what's important to us. So the legal structure of your business, there are a couple of different choices, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of each of those choices. So the simplest to form is a sole proprietorship. So if you are currently making beer in your garage and selling it to friends and you don't have any kind of legal structure, you're effectively a sole proprietor. Your business is you and you are your business. So it's a company owned by a single individual without any separate legal identity for their business. So it's very simple to form. You often just have to register with the local tax authority so you can collect and remit sales tax. Different industries require different licenses to operate. You know, if you wanted to be a manicurist, you have to get a license to do that sort of thing. The key downside to this is there's no limitation on legal liability. So all of your personal assets are at risk if there's a judgment against your business. So say as an example, you decide that you're good at working on cars, and so you'll do that in your garage on the weekends to earn extra money. And you just do it as a sole proprietor. You don't form any kind of legal entity for your business. Well, if you forget to reattach the brake lines for a customer's car and they drive off and crash into some other cars, they can legitimately sue you for having done a bad job and caused that damage to property or potentially injuries. They'll win in their lawsuit against you, and the judgment against you will be satisfied by taking your personal assets, your retirement savings, if you own a vacation home, whatever it is, your car, all of those things, they can force the sale of those things and take that money. So that's the biggest downside to being a sole proprietorship. I do not recommend it. Sole proprietorships are not taxable, meaning the activity and the tax liability flows onto the owner's personal tax return on a Schedule C. They have a limited life. When the owner dies, the business dies, and they have a very limited ability to raise capital. Essentially, the owner needs to borrow money personally and then use it in the business. Partnership is kind of the next level of complexity up, and that's two or more people that are engaged in an effort to earn a profit. Keep in mind that you can be in a partnership without drafting legal documents to be in a partnership. If you are engaged with another person in an effort to earn profit, you are effectively a partnership and you'd be treated as such even though you're not legally registered as a partnership. They're a little bit more complex to form. I absolutely recommend involving an attorney if you're going to start a partnership. That partnership agreement is going to cover how do you let new partners into the business, how do partners leave the business, how do we split up profits, who does what. All of those kinds of things are covered in the partnership agreement. And generally, the more time you spend drafting that agreement, the less likely you are to have disputes later. There is also no limitation on legal liability in a partnership. That means every individual partner is personally liable for all of the liabilities of the partnership. So if you go into a partnership with two other people, the three of you form a business, and the two people you choose to go into business with have no personal assets, if there's a judgment against the partnership, you will end up paying the whole judgment. So, and then it's your business to go after those other two people, but it's joint and several liability. Partnerships also aren't taxable. They do file a tax return that's informational, but the partners pay the tax on their individual returns for their portion of the income of the partnership. It has a limited life, meaning when partners change, the business actually changes. There's a limited liability to raise capital. Mainly it's through finding new partners to come into the business, but that no limitation on legal liability scares away a lot of people that do have money. All partnership property is co-owned, so once you contribute some assets to the partnership, they become partnership assets, not your personal assets anymore. Mutual agency means that any partner can obligate the company on behalf of all the other partners, sign a lease agreement, enter into a supply agreement, buy a piece of machinery, all of that. The advantages, a couple. One is that you can participate in income beyond what you might be able to do yourself, and hopefully there is synergy. The partners that you choose all bring something unique and different, and together you're stronger than you are apart. One form that I think will probably be very popular with a lot of you is an LLC. So that's a type of legal entity that gives limited liability to owners, so your personal assets are not at risk. Your only amount that's at risk is your investment in the company could be lost, but you don't have to worry about your retirement account being attached or your home or anything like that. Definitely you need to use a lawyer to do that. To form one of these companies. So there is, again, limited legal liability, so that's the main advantage. It is also not taxable. The taxes flow through. It has an unlimited life, and there's a limited ability to raise capital. You're limited to how many members you can have, and that's what they call ownership interests in an LLC or members. There's a limit to how many members you can have. So, but for most of your businesses, this is probably going to be the sweet spot for you. The last type I want to talk about are corporations, and these are the most common in terms of revenue. So all the companies I've worked for have been corporations. So it allows for shares of ownership. So you can issue shares of stock. There are legal requirements that you have to go through in order to be able to do that. You have to register that with the state and provide a lot of information. Those laws exist to protect investors from being victims of fraud. So that's why they have rules about that. So definitely more complex to form. You want to involve an attorney. There is no individual legal liability beyond the investment you've made, so it protects your personal assets. When I started my company, Big Toys, the playground company that my wife and I were owners of, that was a corporation. We didn't want a child to get injured on a playground and sue us and come after our personal assets. So a corporation provided that protection. The main downside to corporations is double taxation. So a corporation will file a tax return and pay income tax to the federal government. So as an example, if your corporation earns $100,000, you'll file a tax return. You'll pay $21,000 as an example on that $100,000 in income. And then if the other $79,000 is distributed to the owners, then they'll pay tax on that as well in the form of dividend income on their personal tax returns. So the income of the corporation is taxed at two levels. That's the main downside. And the main benefit of an LLC, that doesn't happen there. It has an unlimited life, so the corporation is a separate legal entity that can engage in its own legal activities, buying and selling property, entering into contracts, and so forth. It continues on beyond the lives of the owner. And then there's an enhanced ability to raise capital. So here, once you get up to a certain point in terms of size, you can start to issue shares of stock and have people invest money in you and that sort of thing. So a little bit about intellectual property. So there are really four main kinds of intellectual property here that are going to be relevant for you guys. One is a patent. If you came up with a new way, a new process to make your product that didn't exist before, it's truly unique. You can patent that with the federal government, which provides you with a monopoly on that process or product that you've invented for a period of 20 years. So it's basically a government allowed monopoly. So the benefit there is that you don't have to worry about doing a bunch of development work and then your competitors just copy it and reap the rewards of that. So that may be applicable for some of you. Copyrights, really that applies to artistic work. So music, literature, things like that, not necessarily applicable to you guys. Trademarks definitely will be. So here you can go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So it's uspto.gov, and you can do a search for trademarks there. So if you're thinking about the name for a new type of whiskey that you want to make, that's a good place to search to find out if anybody else is using that name. So trademarks are protection for the name of a product and for any kind of logos or artwork that's associated with that. So as an example, you can't make a beer and put the Apple with the bite out of it logo on your beer, on your six-pack. They wouldn't allow that. Apple would have issues with that, or the Nike swoosh or something like that. So it's a way to protect both names and images associated with products. Now this lasts indefinitely. There's no time limit on it. Every 5 years you have to renew your trademark, show that you're continuing to use it, but then it exists into perpetuity as long as you continue to use it. So that's important. Licensing agreements is something that you might want to enter into. Either you could sign a licensing agreement with a larger provider that would let you, for example, make some of that company's product and sell it and pay royalties to them, or you could do it the other way around. This is a way a lot of companies expand internationally, is maybe they don't want to own a brewery in Canada or own a distillery in Canada, but they might license somebody to make their particular product somewhere else. So way to earn money. So some additional items, there should be a clear, detailed description of your products and services that your business intends to offer and what's unique about them. There should be a brief description of the leadership team. There'll be a deeper discussion of that later in your business plan, but in this first section it would basically just say kind of who it is that's going to be on the team to make this happen. Not necessarily their resume or anything, but just who they are. Here's a good place where you may want to put in to be hired or to be determined. If you're going to use a board of directors, that's an outside group of people that help direct your business. They have legal liability for the actions of your business, so a lot of people will use an advisory committee instead. The nice thing about an advisory committee, and that might be 3 or 4 or 5 people that have business experience that are going to meet with you periodically and look over what you're doing and give you some direction. That can be a really valuable thing to have in your company. I really recommend it for a couple of reasons. One, you get the advice of people that are objective outsiders that yet know something about your business, and that can sometimes help you see things more clearly. Sometimes a business owner is too deep in it to see all of the details, and somebody outside has a clearer vision of it. You also get the benefit of their contacts. So you may be expanding into a new type of product where you don't have relationships for the supplies for that product, and some of your advisory committee members may have those contacts. If you know where your business is going to be located, you would include it here. And by development stage, that's the next item there. That's what I mean is we are in the startup planning phase, or we have made initial products and are building up to go to market. It's kind of where you're at in the process. And I would imagine for most of you, it would be that you're in the planning stages. And then financial status, what kind of an investment have you made? That sort of thing. And then very important, what do you want? What is this business plan asking for? Are you asking for a loan? Are you asking for an investment? And why? What are you going to do with the money? So the industry analysis section contains a description of the industry. So maybe you're in the craft distilling industry or the craft beer or cider industry, that sort of thing. What are the major trends in your industry? So is there a trend towards healthier products? Is there a trend towards growlers, as an example, a packaging trend that's changing things? A lot of times you can get this kind of information from industry journals or maybe websites that are directed towards members of your particular industry that can have blogs on them that have information about this. So I would look to kind of public sources of information for your particular industry to find out what the trends are there. And then what are the strategic opportunities? So if it's moving in a certain direction, what can you do that other people aren't doing yet that might be meaningful? This is where you would describe that. Here's a chart from your book that you might find useful. So here's a way you can look at, again, if you can find public information about the industry overall. Sometimes there's information about revenue for the industry. Sometimes it's expressed in units sold or employment. So these might be different types of ways the size of the industry is recorded. And then is it growing? So what was it a couple of years ago, last year, this year, next year? What's it projected to be? And then GDP growth, you can find that's gross domestic product. That's the size of the industry, the size of the overall economy of the US. So you can then find that by Googling it and then compare, is the industry growing faster than the overall economy or slower, that sort of thing. So this is industry sensitivity. So I think in your case, most of you will be fairly immune to economic cycles. I think people tend to buy beer and wine and distilled spirits regardless of the economic cycle, but some industries are more sensitive to economic cycles than others. Okay. So some other issues, if there are seasonality aspects to your business, that should be addressed. For example, if you're only going to make beer for Oktoberfest, that should be clear that you're going to be very, very seasonal. You're only going to make beer in the fall, as an example, but many of you probably that won't be the case. Are there technological changes that are happening in your industry or that you propose? Have you come up with a new way to brew beer or distill spirits, that sort of thing? What kind of regulations and certifications are required for your business, and how do you plan to go about getting those? Again, if you can imagine yourself as the investor that's reading this business plan, if you know that there are certifications required or regulations required to start up and the person doesn't address that, that would give you pause. That would cause you to kind of question their ability to pull this off. So it's important to do that research and address that in your business plan so they know you've thought about it. What are your proposed supply and distribution channels? So how are you going to acquire the products that you'll need to make your products? Are those going to be imported or locally grown? What is the uh, who are your relationships going to be on that in that way? And then how are you going to get your product to market? You're probably not going to only sell product to people that walk up to your facility and buy it directly from you. You're probably going to want your product in potentially in bars or grocery stores or liquor stores or those kinds of things. So how are you going to uh, make those connections and get your product in those places? And then the financial characteristics. So just basically how is it that you're going to make money and what's the plan for that? And again, that aspect will be described more later in the plan, and I'll have another lecture about that. So that's the end of the lecture for week 3. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you.